Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
Tradies, another episode of Beers with Contractors. Listen, I have been working with a ton of companies in the last month. And just to give you guys some context, by the way, Chris, our producer, is in the studio today, and he may pop in because I like to go on little rants and then I miss something. So he may pop in today. I hope you get to see Chris today. He is the man. He is awesome. He came in after Drake. Many of you guys know Drake, all four of you out there. But just in the last few weeks, spoke at the University of Oklahoma, then had to fly to Omaha, Nebraska to speak at a conference. And we were showcased there with a bunch of home service contractors. Then came back home to my home in Oklahoma City, then out to Lexington, Kentucky to be a part of the National Foundation Repair Association board meeting, and then drove down to Nashville to be a part of one of our sponsors, Foundation Rescue Supply, had a one-day financial workshop, and man, a pattern just kept showing up. And today, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is if you're out there, I don't care what trade you're in, you have been dealt with this problem at some point if you're running your own business. I don't care if you got 2-3 people or you got 300. Somebody is going to come to you and say, hey, I want to raise. And you got to be able to navigate that. And this is going to segue a little bit into performance pay. Obviously, many of you guys know that I'm passionate about this. I built an entire software platform around it, but even without using my software system, I just want to share a little bit of knowledge around what that is and why it's so valuable. So first and foremost, when you have that employee that comes to you and says, hey, I want to raise, that's a perplexing thing. And I have felt that as a business owner because, you know, we generally, a lot of business owners, they want to do well with their employees. They want to give more where they can, and it's just natural for a lot of business owners. But also, a lot of times when that request comes through, it's not based on a lot of premise. It's very emotionally driven. And those employees may not have an understanding of cost, meaning the insurance, property and casualty, heck, health insurance. The fact that steel or wood or some other product went up 10% this month because some country half a world away shut down or is in a war. So a lot of employees are unaware of that because they're literally sitting in their seat and they understand their world. And that's an important thing. So before we get started into talking about performance pay, I have kind of a strategy here that I like to go through is first off, know where you are at in your market. If you got a good chamber of commerce or heck, ChatGPT, a lot of census data carries this. Like, look what your labor, whether or not it's direct labor on the job sites or indirect labor in the office, what those positions are worth in the market. That helps remove a little bit of the emotion. So, for example, here I have the Chamber of Commerce that I'll say, hey, I've got a marketing coordinator, and I need to know the average or median income for those types of roles per hour, given, you know, our market. And many of you guys know I'm in Oklahoma City. Well, my market's going to be a lot different than you folks maybe in, call it Chicagoland. You know, the cost for that position is going to be higher because you live in an area that has a higher cost of living. So, but I'll pull that data, and it's go ahead and do this before your employees ask for a raise. Because I love my employees, but sometimes those requests are coming in a high degree of emotion. There may be something that's happening in their life, or it could be like, hey, it's legitimate. They've been there for years. They've contributed to profitability of the company, and they deserve it. So, but it's always good to have a comparative. So you're making smart financial decisions as a business owner before you just go, poof, here's an extra $20,000 a year, for crying out loud. So go to your Chamber of Commerce. If they have that data, great. If not, pull from your state census data. And you can Google and ChatGPT and Claude this all day. And even some of them will show the income based on the years of experience. So obviously an entry-level position is in the market worth less than, say, somebody that's in 5 years in that role. and that's changing rapidly. But I think you should prepare yourself because that question is going to come. As you scale your business, it's just natural. So when you have this, we do have market caps on the role. So we can't overpay somebody in a given position with their base salary or hourly income. And we're going to talk a lot about like fair wages and earnings compliance. So I just want to go ahead and preload. I'm sure there's going to be a disclaimer in the video that I'm not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer around compliance, but I get to work with over 5,000 companies around the country that do this. And so I've learned the hard way that each state is different, but also each country is different, including our friends up north in Canada and even our friends across the pond in Australia. But I'm speaking specifically to folks in the home services business in the US today. So when that employee comes to you, that's where a lot of folks ask me about performance pay. And I saw this in my speaking rounds in Omaha, Kentucky, Nashville, even the University of Oklahoma the last few weeks. And let's just kind of break down before we even get into performance pay, because it's a buzzword in a lot of home services companies right now and little social media groups and things like that. I don't think we understand what performance pay is. So performance pay is essentially an incentive when an employee does a certain threshold in productivity, or they come under a threshold in their labor output cost, or like it's an attaboy spiff. We're going to get to that later, but let's just talk about the history, because performance pay is really confused a lot with piece rate. This term piece rate is something that we think is pretty new, but no, just to give some credit, this piece rate has been around since the 1800s, and specifically the 1830s. And it really started to come in during the Industrial Revolution. It started in manufacturing and textiles, where the employee was paid per unit of a widget that they were producing in the marketplace. So as we were working through that, the employees, obviously you can see where this is going. This created some issues with working practices where it's like, hey, you're paid 2 pennies per, call it a piece of steel widget, and they can only produce like 3 in a day. Well, that's great for the business and the margins, but not for the employee well-being. So this was later adapted, that this concept of piece rate was later adapted in the late 1800s by a guy named Frederick Winslow, who was actually a mechanical engineer. And it's kind of cool to think about, because when you think of like this concept of improvement of efficiency, that's what Frederick Winslow did, is he improved on piece rate through manufacturing practices to dial in the best, balance between output versus well-being of the employee. Now, as you can imagine, in the 1800s, and by the way, there's still people doing piece rate today in the same way that piece rate was done in the 1800s. And I got news for you. If you're doing it, there's this thing called Fair Wages Act that was passed in 1938. You should probably look into it. It's been around a while too. So Frederick Winslow perfected a lot of the issues with piece rate. And it's really helpful because it drove productivity during the Industrial Revolution. And at the time, a lot of the workforce, they were like, hey, if I can do that and be done, then great, pay me more. And, if I can work harder and do more output, then okay, then I get to make more as well. But this was also a time when 6-day work weeks were incredibly common. There wasn't federal paid holidays. Heck, Labor Day didn't exist at this point, which now we know is common in everyday, home services. So let's fast forward. So in 1930s, the Fair Wages and Earnings Act was passed. And then this really established a lot of the rules that we live by as contractors every day, where we have to pay an employee a base set of pay based on the terms that in exchange for their time or services. So this could be hourly rate, overtime, it could be salary. And then we still have a large group, even early 1900s, that they're still contracting, subcontracting, 1099ing, things like that. Well, moving into the 60s, this is where this became a bigger problem. And even later in 2007, where, a lot of employees, if they're working more than 80% of their time for you, they're technically not a subcontractor. And it's a common mistake. I've made this mistake too, where it's like a salesperson's like, hey, just 1099 me so I can write up my expenses and things like that. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, then you find out like, no, technically they're still your employee. So when you're self-performing and you have people in your business, it's good to be very careful about whether or not you decide that they're contract employees or they're W-2. Because if they are well over 80% of their time is working for you, you are going to need to look at that and say, all right, yeah, are we just putting a disguise on this? This is really an employee. We think it's a benefit to them to be 1099, but in the eyes of the Department of Labor, according to the Fair Wages and Earnings Compliance Act, they are an employee of yours. And it only takes one person to really be ticked off, whether or not it's a customer reporting you or an employee that's upset about their paycheck, all of that. So, and I don't want to say that I have bias to either or. There's a lot of industries I work with that their workforce is subbed, and that's commonplace for them. And it works for their businesses. And by the way, go back a few episodes. I had a great attorney on that talked about subcontractor master service agreements. So it works for their business. It's hard to self-perform a $50 million a year commercial construction company that only works on Starbucks and Scooters coffee buildings, right? So, and other customized services. It's better to go seek the specialist. And as many of you guys know, I'm a big fan of fractional roles like CFOs, marketing, things like that. Well, we're doing the same for the employee. But when you fall into this kind of category of, hey, this is an actual employee, there's a few rules before we even start about their base rates of pay compared to what we know now about piece rate. So obviously we have minimum wage in every given state. Some have mandated a state minimum wage. But when you look at that, the state minimum wage is the base rate of pay. You cannot take out of that, even if you have performance-based pay. So if you are a contractor out there that's saying, hey, you're a W-2 employee, but I'm going to pay you, call it sets of barrels for your spray foam. If you're not tracking the hours and overtime against what you're paying in piece rate, that's a major compliance issue. So same to the effect of we have employees that are maybe they're making so much in performance pay. It's like, hey, we're going to pay you, but we're not going to pay you overtime. And it's like, no, you can't do that. Even if you have an agreement with the employee, there's certain laws that will supersede that. So if you feel like, hey, I've got a pretty good agreement here, they've signed it, that may not actually fit the bill. So just be aware of that when you're trying to institute some performance-based pay systems, which really comes back to that question of like, I want to prevent that employee from, rather than asking me for a raise, it's like, well, no, there's your raise, go get it. So now that we understand that kind of basic premise of performance pay, now let's start breaking down what you should be aware of before even talking about instituting performance pay in your business. And a lot of this isn't hard. However, it's best to measure twice, cut once. We're a bunch of contractors. You've heard that saying, how our dad yelled it at us probably 20 times when we were young while we were dropping the flashlight and supposed to be holding it. You know the whole kind of niche there and cliche. But now let's break this down. So you want to institute a performance-based pay plan for your employees. And let's just start with frontline. And I'll eventually get into sales and manager, sales teams, management teams, all that. But really what I like to come down to when establishing a performance-based pay is you have to understand your costs first. Zig Ziglar said, you'll never hit a target you cannot see. So if you're trying to improve labor, but you don't know your labor rates in a specific area, that's a problem. So what I like to do is encourage companies before instituting this. And I actually work with several companies around the country with this before launching. So if you want to learn more about that, like I have a very special onboarding track that I provide for free to companies that we dissect their books, their pricing. We go through their cost of goods sold. We also understand their break even. I love to do that, especially with companies that don't know it. It's like where I'm happy is helping companies like that. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link down in the show notes. You can grab a time off my personal calendar and we can start talking about this, because performance pay in general, just to set a kind of a narrative here, when done right, it on average will show 14% increase in productivity. Same guys, same trucks on the highway, all of that, same tools, just poof, installing 14% more. So let's just narrow that down. $100,000 a month normal, now they're installing 114. You have that by 3 crews, man, you're cranking. And now you've got, upwards of 40 plus thousand installed more with the same 3 crews than you did before. Like that's the win-win. Other thing, labor on average goes down 3% of gross. We're not talking little bits here. Like we're talking 3% from the top line revenue to the labor. You're getting 3 percentage points increase. My favorite is, and I just pulled this morning, average hourly rate increase for the employee is closer to $9.72. So if your employee came to you and said, hey, I want a raise, ask them, well, how about I give you $9.72 in a raise? Would that make you happy? Of course it would. But it's got to be based on profitable measures and not just a charity case, which back to the case of looking at your local chamber of commerce, things like that. You don't want to just give it away without any expectation. And that's where a lot of companies come to us. So real quick, let's break down performance pay for frontline. This also goes for salespeople. So there's 3 types of performance pay that exist on the market. And actually, I'll put a little asterisk here. This first one is spiffs. Spiffs are those attaboys. You did this and I reward you for it. So here's an extra $20 in your paycheck. Makes sense? Like, hey, Earl, you killed it this week. You had a clean truck after a week when it was 105 degrees outside. I just want you to know you are awesome. Here's a $100 gift card. Makes sense, right? Those are spiffs. The next one is KPI-driven metrics. So these are, by the way, KPI is key performance indicator. These are typically judged on a metric in that given department. So for a salesperson, it may be, hey, if you break $120,000 and 35% closing rate, I'll give you $500. Well, that's a KPI-driven metric. You can't find on your profit and loss statement closing ratio and total sales per rep, or even, the gross profit margin per rep. If you're good at tracking it, you can. But that's a KPI-driven metric. So that behavior you're trying to change, it's going to take a while for it to show up on the profit and loss statement. So the reason I say that is if you're incentivizing a salesperson on, say, average dollar per sale or average dollar per lead, well, when you go to your profit and loss statement, you're not going to see that. You are going to start to see some different things around, well, now we're starting to see reduced indirect overhead, but it may take 30 to 90 days for you to see that. So the last performance pay metric we see most commonly around the country is labor-driven performance-based pay. And what I mean by this, and I know we joke about 5-6 listeners. Heck, I see all you folks on TikTok. Thank you for following and liking and subscribing. But when we say labor, we bid our jobs to a client. And they say, hey, I like it. Let me sign that. Here's my check. Schedule the work, right? So we have a contract that has a fixed set of expenses and fixed set of what we hope to be gross profit, net operating profit. Now, the only thing that can go wrong is the variable costs, labor or materials. So when we talk about labor-driven metrics, this is incredibly important. Why so many companies follow this, and including in my business, is that's the one thing that can turn that profit on that one job sour. Meaning you are literally paying to service that client. If you got a warranty on it, even more so. So, for example, in a lot of industries, and I'll just rattle some off from my experience, in my industry, it's very common to say, hey, 12% of the job total is what we allocate for labor. That's a percentage model. Some people call it commission for a lot of outdoor living spaces and custom hardscape companies, flat work, commercial paving, home remodels or home construction. It's done by the block of budgeted hours. And what I mean by that is hey, we budgeted 68 total man hours on this particular phase of the project, whether you have one person on that job or 5. Every single person is contributing against what we bid, sold, and received acceptance on from the customer. So that's an example there. We see tons of others, linear feet for fencing, square feet for insulation, spray foam, and also we typically will see where even accelerators, meaning if you installed this amount or your labor threshold was below this amount, you get an additional bonus on top of it. So just pulling from data across the country on all of our users, you can do this on a spreadsheet, but of course, if you want to learn more on how, like I had this issue of just trying to train guys and tell them crystal clear what they're making. And if you want to make more, this is how you do it. That's where performance.io came from. So when you have identified these 3 types, it's best to know where you're at. So real quick, breaking this down, if you pull out a profit and loss statement, a lot of them are wrong. I love you CPAs out there, man. You've done so much for me, but I'm going to harp on CPAs and bookkeepers. You typically see income, that's at the top. And then the first thing is gross profit margin. It's like, whoa, time out. So when we talk about margins, your gross profit margin comes after the income comes in and then your cost of goods sold. Your cost of goods sold are your equipment, rentals, by the way, labor, materials, subcontracting fees, any sales commissions, permits, engineering, anything that is directly associated to the invoice to a customer. And I've said this a lot, you cannot invoice a customer for this mouse I have right here. I mean, what am I going to spread the $22 across all of my invoices and say mouse charge? No, because that's an indirect expense to put mice on every computer in my office. But every time Earl is out on a job site, I can take him and bill for his time directly to a customer, thus direct overhead. So direct overhead is also your cost of goods sold. When you take income minus equipment fees, materials, labor, burdened costs, I didn't mention that before, so any insurance or benefits around those employees, sales commissions, and then of course, permits, engineering, any of that whatsoever, when you draw that line, what's left over is your gross profit margin, okay? So now we've got a clear idea of gross profit margin. Performance pay on the front line helps with improving that labor margin on those scenarios, meaning we budgeted 14% labor or 100 man hours. And when you come in under, I'm going to give that back to you. But here's where it drops and starts to all fall apart. Most employees are very good at understanding what's in it for them. But when you are calculating this on a spreadsheet, you need to be insanely transparent with the entry of data. The number in their head does not match what is in that spreadsheet. It's emotionally based, but it's also results driven. So when that number doesn't match, the employee naturally will go into fight or flight and say, hey, you're taking money out of my paycheck. I was really hoping to have $300 extra. And now you're telling me it's 200. What's $100 there that they don't realize what happened? And so being very, very transparent in real time about my actions caused X or my actions caused Y in regards to my paycheck, that's one of the sweet spots of performance pay. And it goes for a lot of employees. Doesn't matter if you're in production, call center, sales, office, and accounting. I mean, heck, we're seeing all sorts of cool things, even managers rewarded off of dollars over to EBITDA, which we'll get to in a second. So just understand, depending on your industry, you have a budgeted labor rate. You have a cost that you hopefully planned for before you actually stepped foot on that job, deposited the check from the customer for the initial materials, all of that. But if you're just guessing it, you need to figure that out right away, because the employees could be inefficient. You may be paying too low in your market, or you may be just right. And that's stuff I share with folks all over the country, is understanding where they're at in the market, similar to that suggestion about going to your chamber of commerce. My employees, for example, many of them have a base rate of $21 an hour, but after performance pay, they're making $39 an hour. So it's like, yeah, they're good. We're still tracking those hours for labor and compliance. So, all right, tradies, I know lead generation has been top of mind for all of us this last year and going into 2026. So let me put you onto a marketing team I actually trust, Greenbaum Steyer's Strategic Marketing Group. And oh yeah, they're friends and network affiliate of ours, but I'm telling you straight, these guys are different. Most marketing agents, they've never worn boots. They never dealt with seasonality, weird leads, price shoppers, no-shows. You know, Mrs. Johnson calling you back 3 times because her basement feels wet. Greenbaum Steyer's was literally born out of a successful foundation repair and waterproofing company like mine, so they actually understand how our businesses work. They've been doing this since 2017. They're a full-service branding website. They convert with SEO, compounding over time, traditional media buying, and of course, lead generation that makes the phone ring. But the big thing is strategy. They're focused on helping you overcome what's holding you back, tighten up your systems, and hit real goals, profitable goals, and not just some vanity metrics and pretty reports that you can brag about at some conference. So if you're tired of guessing, tired of wasting money, and you want a team that knows contractors and knows how to drive results, go check out Greenbaum Steyer's Strategic Marketing Group. Tell them Will and Terry sent you. Their website's greenbaumsteyers.com. That's GREENBAUMSTIERS.com. I'll put it in the link. Keep grinding out there, tradies. Real quick segue into sales. Depending on your state, many of which we just have straight sales commission. We paid them a training. They're out there in the world. It is common to have salary models for the more complex businesses that are having their training salespeople. Think of custom remodeling. The project may be a 9-month project. That employee may have a salary, then they get a commission on gross profit margin. A lot of different ways to cut it. If you pay straight commission, you are going to want to make sure that you put into your employment agreement during training time, office time, follow-up, all of that. Because otherwise, you have to pay minimum wage on any hours not attributed to what their core services are. So it's like, hey, I got to come in for a sales meeting on Monday, and then I'm going to go run leads after. By definition, if it's not outlined in your agreement, those hours of office time technically should be paid in minimum wage. So when it comes to sales teams, it's really important to know that. And it was, I believe, in maybe 09 or 010 that certain deductions, mileage deductions on taxes, that went away, which caused a lot of salespeople to want to go in the 1099 direction. But just be cautious. If you're going to do that, you need to require a lot from the, hey, I need to see your insurance. Give me a declaration page. How much of your time are you working for me versus someone else? Which never really felt right to me, but to each their own. You do what you want in your business. But also any incentives, because guess what? If you give an incentive, whether or not it's a spiff or KPI incentive to even a sales rep, it could be subject to the Fair Wages and Earnings Compliance Rule. So, sounds complicated so far, but I assure you I'm going to bring the plane down here in a little bit. So, when you are now identifying where you're compliant or not for your pay as it stands today, and listen, it pains me to tell people this during maybe a demo or a call, but if you're doing it illegally, please change that. Don't even use like a product or software or anything, but you need to fix that because it's going to become a bigger problem. Okay. Now, once we've identified production, end users, service techs, salespeople, now we get into our call center. This one's actually pretty KPI driven. What I'm seeing across the United States is typically your base hourly rates for call center folks and booked appointment bonus and recovered appointment bonus, meaning if the appointment canceled, did we recover it? So when an employee comes in and they've gotten, call it $18 an hour, they booked, 15 appointments. We currently are paying, $2 per appointment booked, $10 for every recovered appointment booked, meaning a customer booked us, but then they cancel before we got out there. If they can reschedule and recapture that, man alive, that's a powerful one. I typically don't like paying any type of incentive, and it's not common in our system for collecting payment, meaning if you collected payment, you get an extra, call it $5 or whatever. Main reason being is there's already a lot of costs associated with that payment. So to slice off a percentage or something like that is fine. You just need to make sure you accommodate it in your pricing. If you want to be that generous, knock yourself out, but we don't see that often in our system. Now let's get to managers. So in a lot of our home services companies, we like to grant the title of manager to a lot of people, sometimes prematurely. But there's other times where we actually have a manager that's really good and their talent probably exceeds where we're at as a company, which is an awesome thing. If you can find those people, man alive, go get them. So in regards to salary employees, managers, we have found most common is to pay a base salary plus on top of their base salary, they can earn up to 15% of their income through certain KPIs. Good example would be gross profit margin for a production manager with break even and hitting install targets, or Google reviews even. We're finding Google reviews are very common. Safety and incidents, those are very common. So I actually like the idea, and we do a hybrid of this now where managers are rewarded on net operating profit. Some do it by dollars over EBITDA. So for every dollar over 14% EBITDA for the month, they're making an extra 10 cents on every dollar that comes through. There's a lot of different ways you can code that, but that's important because now everybody in the organization, install teams, sales teams, call center teams, and even managers, they're starting to think like owners. And that's really where the power comes in. So end user data from this whole concept is kind of neat because we have companies all over the country, all different walks of life. I would challenge you, if you have a bonus system, to walk in on Monday and say, hey, do you understand our bonus structure? Raise your hand if you do. You are going to be surprised at how many people actually raise their hands. Be sure to keep it simple, make it transparent, keep it real time for the employee. Even if it's on a spreadsheet, on a TV, and they look and understand the numbers, that's where the magic happens. However, it really happens when it's right here for them. So based on that, you want to be vocal, you want to be visual with your performance-based pay system because it also shows where wins happen. We've all heard the story of the 4-minute mile. Nobody said it could be done. Somebody ended up running a mile in 4 minutes or less. And then bam, 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 we had countless others that followed suit. Having that clarity for your team is immensely helpful in understanding, hey, what is possible? And if you would have asked me years ago in my company that we could have 3 installers doing over 2 million, I would have said you were crazy. But now it's like, okay, yeah, we can do this. Pros and cons of putting an incentive-based pay for production teams. If your sales backlog is really low, I would hesitate to put this in place yet. You need to eventually to help shelter your gross profit margin. But if they have already been in there and they've been working, they're doing a good job, but you don't have enough sales, well, they're going to burn through that work because now they've got some skin in the game. And I've seen this countless times. And this is why I say before even launching performance pay, know some of these numbers. Your marketing spend, meaning what is the cost of marketing as a percentage of our invoiced income or revenue? Well, that's going to be heavily driven by essentially the install volume and what we've collected. So as you're working through this, it's important to know you may need to increase your marketing cost when the production and install teams ramp up. So then that way you can keep maintaining backlog and you don't dry up in work. Then, for example, sales, trying to get into making sure that you have an understanding of your gross profit margin so people aren't selling things in a bad way. You're going to want to track that as well. And a lot of financial products like QuickBooks and many others, sometimes their CRM will just spit that out. And that's incredibly helpful because salespeople, they want to be on top in a lot of cases, but sales managers, they want to make sure, hey, are we actually doing this profitably? Or are we just throwing mud on the wall and getting out of every house? It's really important now. The last one, and boy, oh boy, we're going to get into some. If you made it this far, I am proud of you because now we're going to get into some wild, wild things. If you have any type of pay system that is based on a measurement, the Federal Department of Labor will look at that as what we call non-discretionary income. What do they mean by that? Discretionary, which we like to think all of our bonus systems are discretionary. You may hit it, but at any point I can revoke that because I had a bad day. And by the way, that's a joke, but it happens in small businesses all the time where it's like, hey, I wanted to give you a bonus. I really didn't expect to get hit with $30,000 assessment on workers' comp. Like, I want to pay you, but I literally need to deal with this. And if you're in those boots, like, just be sure to continue to conserve cash because those things are going to happen.
Tradies, running your small business can be demanding. You got suppliers you got to work with, you're managing crews, hell, you're chasing sales. It's a lot to take in. Listen, if you want to grow your business, you got to stop working in it and you got to start working on it. So that's where my friends at Foundation Rescue Supply come in. You're not just getting foundation repair products and waterproofing products and air quality control products. With their nationwide distribution, you're getting a partner who knows how to help you scale. And that's why I use them. The Foundation Rescue Supply team has industry knowledge that'll help make your life easier. You get the tools, the trainings, the systems that you need to move the needle. You want your sales team to close more leads? Done, because they have the proven process for that. You need your crews to work smarter, not harder? Done. Their installation training will get you out there and rocking and rolling in the field. With Foundation Rescue Supply, you're not just buying materials here, you're buying a better business system that they have helped create. And you sell more, you install more, and you grow your team. So the bottom line is this: you get best industry pricing, you get field productivity on track, and you get more revenue out of everybody on your team. So this is your chance to step up, scale up, and thrive. If you are ready to make that happen, head to foundationrescuesupply.com, check out their catalog, and speak to my friends, their team, how you can take beyond the products with your company with Foundation Rescue Supply.
So the non-discretionary rule, based on the Department of Labor, it says if you are defining a bonus by a very specific unit of measure, you thus have to do adjusted hourly rates based on the bonus. Don't let me lose you here. And I'll try to put a link down to this article from the Department of Labor. If an employee makes $10 an hour, and they work 42 hours, that means they made $420 on their base rate of pay. But now let's say they got a $100 check for a bonus on performance pay. That's now going to map over top of their hourly pay and they're not making $10 an hour anymore. They're actually making $12 and change. So no big deal. You got the bonus, here's your adjusted rate. Where it gets tricky is now the overtime is not $15 an hour. It's not time and a half in the United States. Because the adjusted hourly rate changed, now it's $18 and change for the adjusted hourly rates. That is the Department of Labor non-discretionary rule. We call it weighted overtime commonly for a lot of companies because now the overtime is weighted. Where it even gets more tricky is, and by the way, this is very, very common in California, Illinois, to name two major states that it's really a big issue in. The states are enforcing this now. And if you're a larger company, I suggest you need to go ahead and move to that model. It only takes one person or an audit to really just throw a mess into the machine. So I just want you to be aware of that. Where it gets even stickier is if you have a multiple week project. And this is specific to performance pay, but you work 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then the job is done, you collect payment or the bill comes in. If you take that payment that week, you can hyperinflate overtime. That bonus has to be accrued back to the previous weeks equally based on the output within those weeks. And that sounds really complicated. It is very complicated, but for us as owners just trying to give our employees more money, that's important to know because, hey, this is a performance paid metric and we have to account for that. And automation is key there. I've helped tons of companies with this. And we think of this more for production, but the same would apply for a call center rep. Little Stacy in my call center says she booked 80 appointments week 1, 90 appointments week 2, 82 appointments week 3, and knocked it out of the park 100. Now, as she's exceeded all of those targets, if she's got a bonus attached to that, well, technically we have to take that bonus and attach it to their base rate or Stacy's base rate and accrue all of those bonuses in the given weeks they were earned. Then it will adjust your overtime rate and then you can process for payroll. Don't let me lose you on this. I love to talk about it because with performance pay, it's kind of a buzzword in the home services group, but there's tons of people out there trying to sell you products and services, but they've never been in the trenches and don't understand the Department of Labor compliance. There's tons of lawsuits all over the country that are creating problems for business owners like you and I that we're just trying to give our employees more. And then that's where I've helped a lot of people to try to keep compliance. So performance pay, let me recap. You have an employee that comes to you wanting a raise. What do? Well, it's best to tie their offering of time and energy in exchange for a metric that is directly tied to a result. Not just a KPI, but an actual result. KPIs are fine, but if they're frontline, you want to be as close to budgeted labor. The farther away you get, you're going to want to be towards more financial and KPI driven. So let that spectrum kind of set in. And then just know that this has been around for a long time. It's been around since the 1800s. But if you want to put together something like a piece rate, you have to track the hourly and overtime model. You have to track the hourly and overtime metrics of your employee in the event of an audit or to make sure that they're not going below their standard rate of pay, including salespeople. And if you don't have it in your sales agreement, you have to pay minimum wage for any tracking during a meeting, scheduled training, any of that, even if it's for 30 minutes. So keep that in mind. All of this was driven by the Fair Wages and Earnings Act back in the 1930s. So here we are in today's future. Construction, we're starving for talent. We're trying to retain people. So performance pay has kind of become a nice little title word for a lot of people, but it's not the end all be all. It's not the elixir that's going to cure all symptoms here. You need to make sure that you know your numbers. What is my income, cost of goods sold, gross profit margin, indirect overhead, net operating profit, and net profit, as well as inventory on our balance sheets, because if you're not keeping an eye on those, you can find yourself looking good on the profit and loss, but you're buried deep in long-term liabilities or inventory on your balance sheet. So keep an eye on that. But other than that, this is kind of a basic overview. I can't stress this enough. I love working with customers through this, going through costs, pricing, deep dive, stress testing, and what's going to change those behaviors you want in those employees. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to give them more money. So please, 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 if you want to have access to my schedule, I'll put my schedule down in the show notes. I could talk about this all day and even share spreadsheets with you if you wanted to learn more. But otherwise, in Terry's absence, we will cheer him as an absent day with Terry, but he will be back next episode. He promised me, and I can't wait to get more updates on this remodel job. But other than that, tradies, I will see you next week on another episode of Beers with Contractors. Cheers, fellas. Bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.